to this special broadcast. Viewers, the government is done with its series of announcements for what it calls the 20 lakh crore mega relief or stimulus package. And we are now in the process of decoding it for you, trying to analyze what part will help the Indian economy and how. Now, to understand this better, we've got former finance minister and senior Congress leader, Mr. Chidambaram, joining us right now. Mr. Chidambaram has been quite vocal about some of the government announcements in the past 6 days. But let's ask him a few more questions. Thank you so much, Mr. Chidambaram, for joining us right now. Would you agree that this set of announcements that were made, it's less of a stimulus, but more of a set of credit moves along with some reforms, some rehashed announcements, and in general, a larger package with lesser outgo of money?
Well, you have said it all. What is there for me to say? I agree with what you say. It is not a liquidity, it is not a fiscal stimulus package. It's a miscellany. It's like Santa Claus with a bag full of various toys.
So, in these various toys, Mr. Chidambaram, what do you think will help us revive our economy right now?
I have listed it in my statement released this morning. I hope you've got a copy of the statement. The total adds up to 1,86,650 if you leave out that doubtful 4,000 crore under National Herbal Plant Cultivation Mission. If you add that, it is 1,90,650 crore. This is additional expenditure. But there's a rider to that. The rider is this additional expenditure can be done only if there is additional borrowing or there are additional revenues. I don't think there are any additional revenues to this government, nor are any additional resources being identified. And the finance minister herself admitted that she would have to borrow more. So let's watch what they are borrowing in the first half and what they are borrowing in the second half. The borrowing calendar will give us a true indication of what the additional borrowing will be, and therefore the additional expenditure will be. I will take that additional expenditure as equal to the fiscal stimulus package.
Okay, so if let's just assume that this is not really 20 lakh crore fiscal stimulus package, but a relief package, so to say, to help the industry, to help the people of this country and help revive the economy, save jobs. In that sense, the measures that have come, will they help, and to what extent?
Well, they will over a period of 4 or 5 years. It won't help this year. Take, for example, that low-cost housing for migrant workers who have left the towns and cities. Does the government have a Aladdin's wonderful lamp? You rub the lamp and the housing comes up overnight. Housing in Delhi or housing in Mumbai is a complex affair. You'll have to get land, you'll have to get building permission, you'll have to have contracts, bids. Housing won't come up overnight. Likewise, there are many, many things which will happen over a period of time. We are talking about how to revive the economy in 2020-21 and what will be the effect on the GDP of 2020-21. We're not talking about a 5-year plan.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Some of these things, like you said, will perhaps benefit us in the long term. Would it have been better that right now, to solve the problem at hand, the government actually came out with an announcement to put money in the hands of people, to give more cash in the hands of people? Because the finance minister says that there are many ways and they think this was a better way rather than directly handing over that money.
We think this is not the better way. In fact, this is no way at all. If I was a migrant worker who has left Mumbai or Delhi and returned to my village in Bihar, this is no package. I will get 5 kilograms of rice for 1 month for a period of 2 months. Beyond that, what? 10 kilograms of rice or wheat will cost me 350 rupees. So you've given me effectively 350 rupees. How long can a family sustain itself on 5 kilograms of rice or wheat every month? We think this is no way at all. This is a hoax. The only way you can give hope to the migrant worker, to the poor families in the bottom half of the population, is to put money. Well, as long as the Congress said, you poo-pooed it. Now who's saying it? Mr. Azim Premji is saying it. Mr. Venu Srinivasan is saying it. As long as Dr. Raghuram Rajan and Dr. Abhijit Banerjee said it, you poo-pooed. Now Dr. Rangarajan is saying it. You don't listen to progressive, liberal, young economists. You don't listen to a political party. At least, for heaven's sake, listen to people who are in business, who've been in business, who built Indian business. Listen to a central banker of great experience like Dr. Rangarajan.
Okay, but for example, the government says they announced a package of 1.7 lakh crore earlier under the PM Garib Kalyan Yojana, and via that they have, used DBT to transfer money into people's accounts. She gave us figures of how much of money has gone into Jandan accounts of women. She said roughly about 4,000 crore, 3,950 crores has gone to construction workers as part of the financial support. So it isn't just to say that they're just getting free ration. Over and above this, there is relief coming in for the LPG. I'm presenting to you the arguments that have been given by the government to this very criticism.
I've counted that. I've counted the cash transfer and the free grain in the original Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan package. I've counted that. 60,000 and 33,000, 93,000. The rest are not government's money. The construction fund, for example, is the construction workers' money. It's like a common saving, a pooled saving.
Correct.
From which they get back their money. How does government take credit for that? Let's keep these things separate. Let's not mix up.
Correct.
Tomorrow, then they will say, income tax refund is also government's money. Thank God they didn't say that.
Correct. Yes. Okay. I would take what you're saying. In fact, they even counted the fact that some of the money that had to go to the farmers, the 2,000 per quarter, has also been paid up front. Now, let's talk about one other important issue, which has been, as far as the businesses are concerned, any business, even a small shopkeeper's business to bigger manufacturing, the big concern was that the banks were not lending. Despite the Reserve Bank of India's measures that were taken, the banks were still not, and maybe justifiably so, are still not in the mood to give out the money, fearing what that would result in a few years from now. What is the solution for that? Will the government's promise of a credit guarantee help?
Your voice is breaking. I've heard the first part. I understand the question. Can you hear me? I don't believe you can hear me.
Yes, I can. Perfectly clear.
Now, the credit guarantee is only for the MSMEs, and that too only for 45 lakh MSMEs up to 3 lakh crore. There are 6.3 crore MSMEs. That means 5.8 crore MSMEs have been left in the lurch. As far as larger businesses are concerned, there is no credit guarantee at all. They won't lend. Why would a bank lend? This government has made it its foremost task to damage, denigrate, and vilify the banking system and every banker. Every bank chairman is facing some inquiry or other after he retires or just before retire. Why would a bank lend? The bank will happily put the money back in the RBI. And that's exactly what has happened between March 27 and yesterday. And I've given out the numbers. Look at the liquidity put in by the RBI into the system, which has found its way to the banks. And the banks have returned the compliment by putting it in the RBI. Unless this government changes which is not going to happen now, or the government changes its approach, which banker will lend?
But this is a tricky path to take, and there has to be a fine balance. A lot of the action that has been taken against banks and former bankers, the government says, is because of the steps that the UPA government took, because of the fact that the UPA government pressurized banks into giving these loans, or allowed the banks to give these bad loans, which is why we are in the current state. The government always says that we have been cleaning up UPA's mess for the past 5 years, and which is why we are in the current state. So where do you balance it out, and how do you draw the line in terms of letting the banks lend but not going after them if something goes wrong?
Complete rubbish. I stood up in Parliament and asked the Finance Minister, please break up the NPAs into 3 parts. Loans given during Vajpayee's regime, which have become NPA. Loans given during the 10 years of UPA, which have become NPA. And loans given by the Modi regime, which have become NPA. They didn't give an answer. They have not given an answer until today. Why doesn't your channel ask any finance ministry official to come and give the breakup? Then we will know the truth. And about pressuring the banks to lend, has any banker said any call came from the finance ministry or from the prime minister's office to lend? Have they got one statement from a banker to that effect? This is Goebbelsian lies. And you guys swallow it without asking questions. What has the media come to? When somebody makes a statement, please question it. Ask the source. Ask the information. Ask the evidence for that. Don't accept something because a minister says it or an officer says it. They have no hesitation in even speaking the untruth in Parliament.
Mr. Chidambaram, we often, quite frequently actually counter question, not just the government, but anybody who's giving us these kind of information or making these statements. I am simply presenting to you what the government says in its defense.
Sorry to interrupt you. Did you get an answer to my question from the government? If you don't get an answer, you shouldn't put that question to me.
No, we haven't. In fact, the data that you rightly said has been presented to the government officials as well about the rise in bad loans that's happened in the last few years versus what we saw earlier. But that doesn't take away from the fact that we are in the situation that we are right now, and the banks are not lending. I think if we speak to them even right now, most of them tell us unofficially that they still are not very sure that they want to give out this money, because 3 years later, the same 3 lakh crore package would have to be written off. And then what do we do?
So ask the government, after having vilified the banks and intimidated the bankers, the government should answer the question. Why do you put the question to me? The point is, I didn't hear anyone in the press conferences of the last 5 days, after the tranches were announced by the finance minister, put this question to her. You put the question to me, I will answer any question. But please put the same question to the finance minister and demand an answer.
Okay, let me ask you this question, Mr. Chidambaram. If the government has indicated an additional borrowing already that has been cleared of roughly about 4 lakh crores, does that give you an indication of how much of additional expenditure they may be looking at, and is that enough?
No. My information is, and this is pretty credible source, that 4,20,000 crore, which they announced earlier, is for gap filling. They are facing a revenue shortage estimated at 4,20,000 crore. So that 4,20,000 will only fill the gap. The original expenditure budget will remain the same, 30,42,230 crore. It's only additional expenditure over and above 30,42,230 crore, which can count as a fiscal stimulus.
Goldman Sachs has recently said, even after these announcements came out, that India should brace itself for a big depression and that there's going to be a 45% contraction in the coming quarter in comparison to the next. What's your own sense? If this is the relief package that we have been given, are we going to get into a depression cycle?
This is only a relief package. Your voice breaks off anyway. This is a relief package in the sense that most of it is comic relief to the poor. The point is that you will have to tell me how much you will borrow additionally and spend additionally over 4,20,000 crore. Let's remember, it is not as though when Corona struck India, India's economy was roaring at 7% or 8% growth. We had already had 7 quarters of declining GDP. And if the March 31 figures had come out in May without Corona, you would have seen a further dip to maybe 4 or 3.75. And the real GDP maybe only 2.5 or so. We were in a slowdown, a very rapid slide down. The lockdown on the slowdown. So even without a lockdown, even without Corona, you required a stimulus package. With a lockdown, if you announce only a package of 1,86,650 crore, you're not going to pull yourself out of the hole. You're in a deep hole. The growth will be negative according to everybody over the last few days, as much as minus 5%. To pull yourself out of this hole, you require a massive infusion of money into the system to stimulate demand. I mean, I'm dismayed that while the finance minister and the officers acknowledge the difference between liquidity and fiscal stimulus, they are not telling the people that liquidity works on the supply side, whereas a fiscal stimulus is intended to work on the demand side. You guys know it. Ask them.
Okay, let me ask you though, since I have you with me right now, what would your suggestion be to the government, Mr. Chidambaram, for creation of demand, the stimulus that this economy really needs? Because let's face it, and for our viewers to also understand, unless we start creating the demand, unless we start spending the money and have the money to spend, it's not going to help even if there is a package for the MSME sector. What is it that they're manufacturing for? What would your main suggestion be for a stimulus package to create this demand?
Well, I've been writing about it, tweeting about it for nearly 40 days. Demand will come only when there is mass consumption. People must consume, people must buy goods and services. So the first thing we should do is, for the bottom half of the population, which has run out of cash, you put 5,000 rupees a month to start with, and if necessary, another 5,000 rupees in the second month. That will cost you 65,000 crore in the first month and another 65,000 in the second month. So they will start consuming. Secondly, give every migrant worker who's returned home 5,000 rupees so that he will start consuming. Then give a wage assistance package to the MSME so that they can pay the wages, retain the workers, and the workers will have money to consume goods and services. Give a wage protection program to the low-salaried middle class. They will start consuming. So you have to look at sections of the population whose consumption has fallen sharply. And all the surveys show that rural consumption has fallen very sharply and urban consumption has also fallen. So if you want to stimulate demand, you'll have to stimulate consumption. If you have to stimulate consumption, you'll have to put money in the hands of the consuming sections of the people whose consumption has fallen. So I've given a whole list of things in my first 10-point program. I've repeated it, I've tweeted it. Who should be given money?
I have limited time with you, but I just want to also seek your view on this other changes that have happened in some of the states. Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh and Gujarat have brought in sweeping changes in the labor laws. We've had significant discussions with the government representatives. I also had a detailed discussion, a heated debate, even with the chief economic advisor, who was completely batting these changes that have been brought in, saying that this is a reform that's needed to create employment. Right now, we need to create employment. We can't just have 10% of the people in these jobs and only taking care of them. We need to create more jobs. But can that be done, Mr. Chidambaram, without creating a safety net for these workers?
These are retrograde steps. The government has been opportunistic. Point is, our labor laws apply only to 10% of India's workforce. India's workforce is 400 million in agriculture and 400 million in non-agriculture. These labor laws apply only to the non-agricultural sector, and that too only to 10% of the workers. The rest are outside these labor laws. Whatever you do with these labor laws, keep them, burn them, it doesn't affect them at all. So the status quo remains as far as they are concerned. As far as the 10% are concerned, organized sector and unionized to some extent, you don't make such sweeping changes in laws which have been there for 70, 80 years without stakeholder consultation, without a discussion in parliament. The Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh has opposed this, and the Yogi government in Uttar Pradesh has withdrawn one order the moment it was challenged in the High Court. Remember, these changes are not yet law because they are on the concurrent list. Even if the UP government passes an ordinance, it has to have the approval of the central government under Article 254. To the best of my knowledge, you can check, no such concurrence has been given under Article 254. So we're talking about a proposal which is not yet law. Law is being opportunistic. You are exploiting a crisis to push through whatever one person or one set of persons thinks is right, ignoring even your own major trade union, without stakeholder consultation, without a discussion in a parliamentary committee, without a discussion in parliament. How can any political party support it? Even if a good reform is done, there is a process of doing a good reform. Stakeholder consultation, legislation, and after debate.
Okay, completely out of time, but I really appreciate you joining us today and giving us your time to help us understand what your views are and what the government could have done better in terms of the stimulus package that this country desperately needs right now. Mr. Chidambaram, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.